Hey, it's Emily, your favorite PodRocket producer. Did you know that LogRocket has a TikTok now? You can catch up on all the interview clips from this show, watch UX tutorials, and get more great content from LogRocket. You can check out the LogRocket TikTok today at log.rocket. See you on TikTok.
Hi there, and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. LogRocket provides AI-first session replay and analytics, which surface the UX and technical issues impacting user experiences. Start understanding where users are struggling and try it for free at logrocket.com today. My name is Paul, and joined with me is Guy Royse. Guy is a developer advocate over at Redis. And we're going to be talking about Redis. We're going to be talking about how he's been making waves with his recent Connect.tech talk beyond the cache with Redis and Node.js. Welcome to the podcast, Guy.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited for our podcast today because Redis is like the sun. If you develop, you've probably touched it or looked at it at some point. And when you look at the sun, a little bit of your eyeballs go zap. And everybody has probably had a similar experience with Redis at some point. But Redis has this reputation of being like your caching layer. And we know there's way more under the hood than devs realize. So Guy here, he's been helping folks unlock hidden superpowers, especially when you pair Redis with Node.js. So before we dive into some more fun stuff like Bigfoot tracking, yes, the Bigfoot, the one and only. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the rundown about how you got to Redis, what got you interested in Redis? And you said you've been there for 5 years, right?
Yeah, just a little over 5 years, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Congrats.
Yeah, I'm clearly committed to the cause because my options have already fully vested. I could leave at any time.
Trooper.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head when most people see Redis as primarily being a cache. That's its primary use case, really. Most people use it as a cache, but what it really is a memory-first database. And so that just makes it ridiculously fast, and that makes it very suitable as a cache, but can do other things. I actually didn't really know much about Redis before I joined. I reached out to them. They had an opening, and I applied, and then I started learning about Redis then. Before that, I'd been doing a lot of front-end work and a lot of mobile work in particular. Redis is intrinsically more of a back-end concern than a front-end concern. I joined the company and started learning all the things it could do and the common use cases and the underappreciated use cases. You spend time with it over years and you get a deep knowledge of how the product works and how it does stuff. But yeah, I joined a little over 5 years ago and I haven't looked back.
You mentioned, Guy, that it's a memory-first database. That's what we're talking about here. What does that mean? And is Postgres not memory first? I'm using it as the poster child because everybody here has used Postgres.
Most databases aren't memory first. So Redis is everything must be in memory. And then disk or SSD, let's be honest, is secondary. What you can think of it as is there's a bunch of data structures that you learned about in university. When you took in your computer science curriculum, there's usually I don't have a proper computer science degree, so I didn't take this class, but lots of people did. I took a class in data structures, and you learned how to make like hash maps and linked lists and sort and sets and all those sorts of data structures. And they just sit in memory in your code. I remember writing some early in my career in C and C++. And just basically those with a socket connection in front of them, a wire protocol, a TCP connection that you send commands over. And at its heart, it's a giant hash table full of these data structures. And so the field in that the key is the way you look it up, and then the value is whatever the hash table is. And that protocol has a bunch of commands to manipulate all those data structures. But it's all in memory. It's actually all on a single thread, too. So there's no locking you have to worry about. But it is persistable to disk in a couple of different techniques, and it's clusterable and replicatable and that sort of stuff. So you can keep it all in memory. So it's in memory first, primary. That's the first place it lives. That's the system of record. But you can also get durability by both through replication and actually writing out the disk and stuff like that. Most other databases are engineered the other way around, where they are putting things intended for permanent storage first, and then internally there's caching to make them perform. But then you have the cache will swap out. You may ask for something that's not in the cache and that sort of stuff. Whereas Redis, it's all going to be in memory, and it's all going to be there like that.
Now, the podcast that we're about to set forth on, we're going to talk all about the amazing ways that you can leverage Redis to do amazing things. We're going to spend a lot of time on that. But before we hop into there, I have to ask if there's like things that you've seen people try to use Redis for, and you just shake your head and you go, I wish this would be a great use case, but you guys are just looking in the wrong spot.
Yeah, Redis is big. Its a big thing is speed, right? So it's all in memory, and so the reason you use it as a cache is because it's fast, and it's fast because it's in memory and because it's got a single thread. But lots of times people will use it when they really don't need the performance. So if you something that's stupid, ridiculously fast, Redis is your champ. You need to scale, and so you can put it in your architecture and cache content or store content in there. It's great for that. If you need to store 2 petabytes of image files, Redis is a bad choice. That's not what it's for. And I've seen people try to use it for just everything. It's not a replacement for like any kind of object store because it needs to all be in RAM. And so that's usually the case that I see people misusing Redis is they're trying to put too many big things in there that really don't need to be accessed as often as they think it does. And it's not a place to archive things, that sort of stuff. I think that'd probably be the main scenario I've seen.
I find that really interesting because we're talking about extremes here, like object storage, archiving, like any Postgres database I haven't built an app on, you're going to be hard pressed to find it more than 10 gigs. So I think this is really interesting because it gives credence. It lays this up on the runway of, look, you can use it for something like an application. Maybe it's not for everything, but it might be more capable than just your super fast cache layer.
Yeah, and 10 gigs is nothing for, that's very easy for Redis to accomplish. You can run that on a single server with just replication and get amazing performance. I sound like a commercial. I apologize.
That's what these podcasts, we want to hype up certain technologies. But that's why we want to throw in, what are people doing wrong with it? We want to sneak that in there too.
Have you tried new Redis branded Redis? Yeah. Now with Gleam.
So if I'm on a team and people are talking about using Redis for a cache store, and that's where the conversation ends, off the top of your head, what are some of the things we're missing out on that you might find in typical Node apps? And then maybe we can go into details on those things following suit.
I have a little joke I like to tell about Redis's primary use case, where when you say Redis's primary use case is caching, which is wrong. Its primary use case is plastering over crappy architecture. So lots of times people will build a Franken architecture that they've inherited, or it's been built by an organization over years, and they need to scale it. And so they need to put caching in front of it. So that's often a common use case. Now, you can do that on purpose, or you can do that by accident. Doing that on purpose lets you build a simple, naive architecture that you can put Redis in front of, and that's being a little more clever. So I have easy to maintain code that scales. But beyond caching, probably the next most common scenario that people use Redis for is session management. That's something you want it to be fast. If you lose it, it might not, if you don't necessarily need to worry about persistence in that scenario, you can turn it off. And if you lose your session, depending on your application, obviously, that might not be that big of a deal. It just means you have to log back in. Or maybe refill your cart. But that might actually be a big deal, depending on, again, your use case. Another common scenario people use it for is pub sub. This is not really a storage thing. It's another thing that Redis does, where everyone can connect to it. So you can publish events on a channel. And it sounds fancy, but what it really is, the channel is a string that you pass in. And then the event is the other string that you pass in. And then anyone that is listening to that first string will get the message. And it's that simple. But it goes in and just immediately fans back out. This is fire and forget. It's just something that happens in real time. And so that's a common way to do synchronization between distributed applications. A lot of the idea of using Redis as a primary database, some people think is mildly crazy because it's a cache, it's in memory. I'm going to lose all my stuff. Talked about that earlier. I actually have a talk that I've been doing. I've done it once, and I'm doing it again here in a few weeks, called Florida Man Uses Cache as a Database. And the idea is
so good.
To address the idea that, hey, what's this crazy idea of using your cache as a database? But a lot of what gets missed out with the greater capabilities is things like the other data structures. The simple scenario for Redis is I have some API that I want to cache the results of. And it just returns JSON, and then I return that JSON to the client. And you're using strings, which is the simplest of data structures in Redis, and you're just getting and setting them. And that is probably 80% of what people use Redis for, actually. But there's a lot more data structures than just strings and hashes. So we've got event streams. We've got bit fields, which will let you do binary math. So you can do a bit shifting and say, go in here and extract the 19-digit unsigned integer located at position 317, right? Which is a very niche thing that it can do.
Like a register.
Yeah. And so you can do like bit masking and that kind of stuff with values in Redis. So there's a whole ton of capabilities. And actually, Redis 8's coming out here really soon. I think it's supposed to be the end of next month. And we've added a whole bunch of fields around JSON. So you can have JSON documents in Redis and probabilistic data structures. And we've added a query engine to it so that you can create indices over your hashes and JSON documents that are in Redis. And even do, of course, everyone's adding vector search to their databases now, but it's all the rage. And so we have vector search. It's actually been there for a few years in Redis, plus a bunch of modules that extend it. And those modules have existed, some of them, for a few years now. And so we're bundling those together. But vector database capability was added, I don't know, about 3 years ago, maybe even 4, fairly early on with it. So it's got a lot of features available to it that people don't take advantage of. I think search is probably the Redis query engine is one of the big ones. And that's applicable to a cache as well. Even if you're not using it as a database, you may actually need to search your cache or search your sessions. Some of these are applicable even if you're not using Redis as a database.
What's something you would warn people against if they are in a traditional database and they want to reach for one of these data structures in Redis? And I'm sure this question is less on this feature, look out, or your database, it wasn't as fast. We're not looking at that. It's more like a systemic design thing of, hey, this is permanent. It's not. Is a pitfall you would give people if they go to the Redis website today, they find their data structure, they say, oh, it does time series. We're switching to Redis.
Yeah, so I think if someone's come from like a more traditional database, Redis is a key value store. And we've added layers like the search and stuff like that. So you can treat that key value store like a relational database in the sense that you can have a bunch of keys that start with the same value. And they're all like Bigfoot sightings, right? And then you could search for those Bigfoot sightings based on properties. And so it feels like you're doing like a select star from Bigfoot sightings where state equals Ohio or state equals Kentucky. But that's where it ends. Because at the end of the day, Redis isn't a relational database. So if you're coming from something like a relational database, you can do some of the stuff, but there's no joins, there's no merges. So it's a lot of things are kind of, what it is Redis is a very, oftentimes a very white boxed experience. So it doesn't hide a lot of things behind the scenes for you. And the stuff it does is really straightforward and easy to use. It's like the difference between a race car and a sedan. Like a sedan, I get in there, it's got an automatic transmission, and I just put it in gear and I drive and I hit the accelerator and I just have to aim the car and it works, right? But if you're driving a race car, there's a lot of things you need to do. And you've got a lot of exposed control so you can squeeze out every last ounce of performance out of it. And Redis is like the race car in the sense that you have access to a lot of things that you can manage and control. Now, the basic use cases are pretty simple. And I would imagine that if I knew how to drive a stick, driving a race car around the track at 50 miles an hour, I don't know, I'm not a car guy. Doing basic things with a race car probably wouldn't be that hard, but winning a race is hard. But it's that sort of thing where it has more exposed surface area for users to interact with, if that makes any kind of sense.
No, it totally does. Let's take a look at a couple laps of an actual race car driver. And can you tell us about the Bigfoot Tracker API that I alluded to at the beginning of our pod? Because that has some interesting use cases. We can see how people are leveraging some of these data structures. What is the Bigfoot Tracker API? And why is it an interesting use case?
Well, it's mostly an interesting use case because Bigfoot's funny. But now it's a microcosm of actually what I just described of storing data in JSON documents and then creating indices over those JSON documents to query them. And so I can store basically, it's like a Bigfoot sightings table. And so every key in Redis would be like Bigfoot : sightings : and then an ID number to uniquely identify it. And I create an index that goes over Bigfoot : sightings, anything that starts with that. And I'll say there'll be a path in this JSON document there that contains the state. And there'll be another path that contains the description of the Bigfoot sighting and another path that contains some other piece of data there. And then you can build indices along those paths and then query those indices and then do things like select them. So it's a good example of using this. The application is silly, obviously, right? I don't know, maybe you're a true believer, but it's silly, right? But it's totally applicable to something you're doing in your regular job. You swap out Bigfoot sightings with a product catalog, which, by the way, is something you would want to have be really ridiculously fast. Then now you're seeing something that's a little more akin to the kinds of things you might query. So someone might want products that are out between a particular date or have particular tags in their descriptor, like their color or their type or what the product category is, or has particular words in their description. Or even you might get really clever and do image embeddings of all the product images, and then store them in Redis as well, and then have the user upload an image and say, I'm looking for bags that look like this or shoes that look like this. The Bigfoot Tracker API is fun and silly, but it's very much the kind of thing that you would do for something real. It's just cast in a fun light.
What does maintenance of that data structure look like? Because anytime you hear JSON B as your column type in Postgres or the like, people get really defensive really quickly and not for an unfound reason, right? So I'm curious what maintenance of that looks like.
In Redis, every JSON document, if you're thinking about it in relational terms, every row in your relational database, to extend this analogy, is a key in Redis. And it's individually managed. It's just this key contains a value. And so there are commands to manipulate, say you got JSON in there, to just get the entire JSON document, to set it, or to set portions of it, or query portions of it, or to modify portions of it in place, or to just remove it, or remove portions of it. And one thing that can be a little tricky with Redis actually is because you just have a big pile of keys, if you don't have them well organized, you can lose track of things. I've seen scenarios where people have used for key, they'll just use like a UUID. But then if you go into Redis to look at all your keys and you need to manage something, it's just a big pile of UUIDs. You don't know what you're looking at. And so an important thing to manage that is using like prefixes on your keys so that we call it a key space. You're just namespacing them so that you know what they are. That's one way to help maintain it. In this case, the JSON is acting like the elements of the JSON are the columns and the key is the row. And more specifically, you're creating paths into the JSON that are indexable columns. So it's a little more sophisticated than that because obviously JSON has hierarchy to it. Right? And it's not just, but if you had like a flat JSON with just things on the root and then you created an index on each of the values in there, then it would be just like a relational database, except you can't do any joins or anything like that.
Is there any sort of OM or something like that for this type of use case on Redis? And if not for this and managing the keys and then the indices in JSON, something that like maps it into types, be it Go, be it TypeScript for a linked list or something like that?
There are actually, in fact, we have 4 of them for Python, for Java, for Spring specifically, for .NET, and for JavaScript. And I wrote the JavaScript one. And so, because the 2 things that are hard with using the Redis query engine are defining your indices and querying them. The query language isn't just a simple select star from. It's got its own syntax. And in my particular case for Redis OM, we called it OM for object mapping because there's no relationships because it's a key value store. When we first created, I joked we should call it ORM, partly because that's what people are going to Google for, but also because then I could just say it was object Redis mapping and be done with it, which is kind of silly. But so like Redis OM for Node, what it does is it gives you a nice, simple structure for defining your schema. So instead of looking at the types that Redis search uses or Redis query engine uses internally, you can just say this is a string, this is a number, this is a date, this is a point on the globe, all the things that are types that would be meaningful to it that can be translated. And then it stores it in the JSON document, pulls it out, and hands you the correct types. And so that's, you define your indexes that way instead. And then the other aspect is I created a fluent interface on the query builder where you can say search where field name dot equals parentheses value dot and field name dot not dot equals. And so you create this chaining fluent builder sort of interface to build up your query. And then at the end of it, you don't ever see the query. You just say dot run or dot execute or dot return. And then you can return various permutations. Give me the count or give me the first page of values or give me an iterator that I can walk over, that kind of stuff.
Do you see Redis expanding its like breadth of how it's being used because of something like the object mapper? Is that something that has been used a lot recently, or is it something that getting that like upward momentum right now? I guess I'm trying to pick your brain about the next like 1 to 2 years of where the JavaScript ecosystem and Redis will head.
Yeah, for the JavaScript in particular, I'm the sole maintainer of it. And so I haven't been able to work on it as diligently as I'd like to, honestly. But I am working on a new release here that I hope to have out at the end of our quarter. I know for the other Node clients, the other OM clients, they are pretty heavily adopted, actually. The .NET one and the one in particular are well adopted. And the Java one has had a lot of extensions for a lot of AI stuff, a lot of the AI vector search stuff. And so that's something I'm planning to add to the Node client as well. I find that depending on what I'm doing, sometimes that level of abstraction is ideal, and other times I want to actually dive a layer beneath it. It really just depends on your use case. But yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question. I guess I'm saying I'd love for Redis OM for Node to be more than it is, but I haven't had time to make it more than it is. But it's still pretty useful. That's where it's at.
Are you finding that more people are reaching for it in like interesting use cases, like via the issues being opened up, or like folks talking on Reddit and like Hacker News and stuff?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of I don't know if you've ever actually maintained an open source product before, library before. It's an interesting experience. And a lot of the requests I get are for, could you make it do this thing that they ask for things that break the abstractions. I get a lot of requests for things like that. And I think this is just part of being in the open source world, where they want to expose more of the inner workings out to Redis OM. And I usually don't go down that path, because the whole point of something like this is to abstract away the more complicated bits. And as soon as you start exposing them again, then you might as well just use the Node Redis client at a lower level than using Redis OM. I have had requests for vector capabilities. Some people found some bugs, that sort of thing. But it's backend JavaScript, and other client libraries other backend languages are more popular than JavaScript. I realize we're a front-end JavaScript podcast. I'm going to say the terrible thing. If you look at the Stack Overflow survey of popular languages, you got 4 at the top. You got Python, JavaScript, C#, and Java. Those tend to be the big 4. I don't know if I have the order right there. I think it is actually Python and then JavaScript, and then I think it's Java and C#. I think that's the order. And Python's really there, not because people are building lots of backends in Python, but because people are doing a lot of machine learning and AI stuff, and Python's the language of choice there. If you took that out, Python would probably rank fairly far in the ranks. Correspondingly, JavaScript is there because it's the web front-end language that you just simply have to use, JavaScript/TypeScript. And if you took out the front end, it would probably drop quite a bit as well. And so back-end JavaScript is just not as popular of a choice as Java or .NET. Those seem to be the go-tos for. And maybe I'm biased because I live in Columbus, Ohio, and it's big enterprise land, and I spent a lot of my career there. But
perhaps, yeah, perhaps. There's an interesting meme I saw on Reddit when he was the president-elect back in December 2024, holding up this like statement signing no more JavaScript on the back end. That one really got me.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to step into like our ending of the pod here, where it's like people are going to be listening to this. They're going to be interested in, wow, maybe I didn't know there was data structures I could use just out of the box. It's like a tap into my server's memory. Very cool. There's like ways I can use this Redis OM. Guy, I didn't know about this before our pod. I love that I know about this now. Like, it's cool. I can have keys and change JSON values. People are going to be listening to this and they're going to wonder, do I need Redis in my application now? Maybe I'm not using it. Maybe there's ways I could benefit from it. If you were talking to one of those people, what's one of the number one areas you commonly find that is like in a lot of web applications that you've seen in 30 years in the profession where you're like, hey, Redis could probably help out with you there? Where people could start to plug in and get started if Redis does not exist in their stack yet?
I think probably the easiest scenario to add Redis to your stack, and it's really not, Redis fundamentally isn't a front end bit of technology. It's back end tech. But the place where you can get like the easiest quick win, every database has got like these sort of tables of information, where it's just commonly used things. They change them like once every month or every week or every year or never. Things like, well, we're going to query a bunch of database to get the states in the United States. That's not going to change very often. Maybe, I don't know. We live in interesting times. But those sorts of things are a fantastic thing to shove into Redis and then get from there instead, because they're not going to change. And so you don't have to worry about cache and validation. You can just load them in there and leave them. And so all those things that populate dropdowns, even things that like you have type ahead in. There are ways in Redis to do where you can query it so that if you have a sorted set full of states, for example, as you start typing the state in, it'll start querying subsets of it. So there's lots of things like that. I think that's the easiest place to get a lot of value really quickly in the scope of a single application. In the scope of an architecture, anytime you're making an API call that is going to return the same thing repeatedly or often, And that's a great candidate. We have a video on our YouTube channel where we talk about caching a weather API. If someone types in their zip code and wants to get the weather, the weather's not going to change in the next 10 minutes. And so the next 50 people ask the same question should be served from a cache, not from that API, which probably costs money to call. That's easy, low-hanging fruit that you can use to get a lot of value for your application in Redis.
Awesome. And if we were to circle back to our talk about Redis as just a database technology, what do you have to say to the folks who might feel allergic? I'm one of these folks to using it as your main database. And I'm allergic because I've just never tried it, right? I'm really curious to hear from somebody that's more involved with Redis about there's a line in the sand. Everything is a line in the sand, but these are some ways it could be really good.
I would say go ahead and try it anyhow. Just kick the tires on it, build a toy, see how it feels. The main reaction and the reason people feel that way is because it's stored in memory first, and they feel like they're going to lose their data. The reality of it is that your other databases are caching as well. And if someone pulled the plug on those, you could also lose data in that scenario. And there's plenty of mechanisms in Redis to prevent that you have explicit control over to determine how much loss you consider to be an acceptable risk. You feel like the power is going to go off and I'm going to lose all data, but you're not. It gets persistent disk. It can be replicated. And so there is a safety net there. Your gut is memory. That's not where you keep things forever, but it totally works. You just got to try it out. And the performance benefits are significant.
RAM being cheaper these days.
Yeah.
It's not hard to come by. And okay, this leads me to my last question, Guy.
Sure.
Redis in memory first. I now understand what you mean by that. How do you think that stance, which is like the big thing about Redis, is going to stack up against technologies like PCIe 5 that have 40 gigabit or something like that transfer speed? Like I could stick in an NVMe drive and use a disk-first database, and it's getting up there.
Well, thank you for another opportunity to plug the product. So that actually is a little bit of a thing. SSD flash memory is getting to a point where its access times are starting to get into the realm of RAM. And I think I have a couple thoughts about that. One is more of we have a product that actually is called Redis Flex, where it will basically keep hotkeys in RAM and put cool keys on flash. And basically you can get about 5 times the Redis for the same cost at about 80% of the performance, so it's still really good, but you get a lot more Redis. But I think there's a bigger thing here, which is when RAM and storage start becoming about the same, that really has the potential to just change how computer architecture works entirely. It actually is a more fundamental shift. And I don't know that everyone's figured out what to do with that yet. But I remember like years and years ago, I had a Palm Pilot. You remember the Palm Pilot? You may not remember
Yes, I do. I'm right on the cusp of knowing what that is.
And the Palm Pilot was just powered by a couple of AAA batteries, and it had a little coin cell battery in there to keep it alive for a few moments when you swapped out the batteries. It didn't have disk. It only had RAM. Their architecture was completely different from anything else. I wonder if there's some old lessons to be learned in how the Palm Pilot, of all things, was architected if solid state memory gets to comparable cost and performance. Because the cost is a big factor. Like
the cost is a huge factor.
Like if I can get 80% of the speed and store 100 times as much stuff, that starts to look like a pretty good trade-off. And could I just build a computer architecture around that and not have RAM? I don't know. It's an interesting thought.
Very interesting thought. It's a good closing thought too at that. We talked about how people want to get into Redis, right? Like check it out, try it for your database. If people wanted to know what you're up to, Guy, because this is a JavaScript, TypeScript centered podcast, You're the Redis JavaScript guy. So you're the Node guy. So if people wanted to know what you're up to, are you posting on X, Twitter, anywhere else?
I'm on X. I'm on Twitter, or I guess X is Twitter. Twitter, currently known as X. Right. That's what I call it. I'm on there. I'm at Guy Royse. I'm on Blue Sky as at guy.dev.
That's a good one. Congrats.
Thanks, yeah. I've got guy.dev as a domain name, which is not cheap every year, but it's totally worth it. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I've been posting to all these things, what's going on. I find, honestly, I get the most traction on LinkedIn, but follow me on all these things. And I have a website at guy.dev where I never I haven't updated my blog since the last time I looked for a job. So that's not a good place to look for me. But yeah, follow me on those socials. That's probably your best bet.
And just for everybody listening, Roy's last name is spelled Royse, if you're looking to plunk that into your phone.
It's Romeo, Oscar, Yankee, Sierra, Echo 4.
Ooh, Nice.
If you picked that up really quick because you're a ham radio person, then I am Whiskey 8 Golf Uniform Yankee.
I wish we had more time to talk about that. I love radios. Guy, it was a pleasure having you on. I definitely learned something about Redis, and hopefully some folks listening feel instilled to give the product another run for its money in some different ways.
Me too. Thanks a lot.